Hey there, guys. So I want to thank you, as always, for taking the time to check out this week's live stream where we're going to be discussing a topic on volume, and we're going to be discussing on what volume means, of course, as it relates to workouts and exercise. And you'll have a clear understanding on what that is as we get to the end of the stream, and you'll know exactly what I mean when I'm talking about volume. And this is very important because when we're talking about volume, it does relate overall to how we progress in our workout routine. So, before I do get started, I do want to mention my website, which is bponlinefitness.com. You can check out a ton of information on there as it relates to online fitness coaching, as well as free information that you can check out, whether it be my free fitness blog, as well as checking out any of the previous live streams I've done. You can usually check out the latest live stream on the homepage. I do have an email newsletter that I send out each and every week on Monday, and a new fitness blog post is uploaded every Friday. So definitely check that out. I do keep that updated. And usually on there too, you'll see any promotions if I do have like offer any kind of discounts on coaching or anything of that nature. All of that information is available for you for free to access and to check out more of what I have to offer. So, with all that being said, guys, let's go ahead and get into this topic, which is about the volume sweet spot and why more isn't always better. So, as I mentioned, I'm going to clarify what we're talking about when we talk about volume itself. So, volume in itself is basically the structure of your workout routine. So, when we're talking about volume, that's basically a combination of three different things. That is your reps that you're performing in your workout, as well as the sets and how many sets of that particular exercise you're performing in combination with the reps, as well as the weight that you're lifting in that specific set of exercises. And if you see volume classified, you know, in sort of a, like like an equation basically, you would have your reps times your sets times your weight that you're lifting. So all of those components are basically what is, identified as volume itself. So I did want to sort of preface that as we're talking about this, because I don't want you to hear the word volume and not really understand what I'm talking about. And that's what we're talking about here is we're talking about the components that, the different components that make up an exercise when we're doing our rep sets, however many we're performing, that is what makes up our volume. So understanding the myth of endless volume. So, what we're going to be discussing here in this slide is basically going over why more sets in itself does not necessarily equal to more gains. So, there's diminishing returns when it comes to adding too much of a specific set of workouts. So, beyond a certain point, extra sets can add to more fatigue, but can lead to little additional muscle growth. There's a plateau effect too. Muscle protein synthesis has a ceiling. So once you've reached that specific ceiling in your workout routine, more work does not equal more progress. There's also a risk of overuse, overtraining, which means excessive volume increases injury risk, places more stress on the joints, and leads to chronic fatigue in the longer term. It also is about the quality over the quantity in what you're performing in your workouts. So, effective, focused sets performed with intensity and good form drive more adaptation than piling on junk volume. So, the main thing here that we're trying to get across, that I'm trying to get across, is that you don't have to act like you have to perform 6 sets of an exercise. You don't need to. In the case of even, especially with hypertrophy, in the case of muscle gain, it's usually less is more. It's more so about the quality of your reps as well as your form in itself than, how many sets you're going through. For example, with me, usually the amount of, sort of sets that I stick to are usually 3 to 4. I usually don't go any higher than that because it's really unnecessary. Like we're talking about, you don't need to go any higher than that. And there's times where you could actually go less than, of course, 3 sets, and you could still get an effective workout. But the thing is here is that what we're trying to sort of debunk and sort of identify the myth here is that many people associate that you have to do just this maximum amount of sets and reps. You've got to go above and beyond. And that's not the case. It's more about the quality of your movement and more about the quality of your reps that matters than how many sets, like performing 6 sets of a workout is just way too much. Performing five is way too much. So you just need to have a good, middle ground there. You need to have controlled and focused, you know, workouts, controlled and focused reps that you're going through, and smaller sets. That's what matters the most. So, as we're continuing on here, I do want to go over 2 key points, and that's over minimum effective volume versus maximum recoverable volume. So, minimum effective volume is basically the lowest amount of training that is needed to spark muscle growth. So, this is efficient, sustainable, and great for beginners or recovery phases. So, what this does is this prevents wasted energy and reduces that risk of overtraining. And then on the other hand, we have maximum recoverable volume, which is the highest amount of training your body can recover from. And this pushes limits but risks fatigue, stalled growth, and injury if exceeded. So this is useful in short bursts for advanced lifters. So when we're talking about the minimum effective volume, what I would say here when we're talking about that is if you're performing roughly 2 to 3 sets, while staying in roughly an 8 to 12, rep range is going to be pretty much the good minimum, middle ground to focus on. Now, we're talking about maximum, we're talking about, a different set of, a set of workouts and a set of volume because you're focusing more on performance based goals. So that's going to be totally different. But when we're talking about minimum effective volume, you don't have to go crazy in order to get any kind of return from your workouts. It's more so about, again, going back to the aspect of the quality of your workouts that matters the most. So just know that that's what we're talking about when we're talking about the difference between these 2 points. Another thing too is that you need to have a proper recovery balance with your workouts. This means that, like I've discussed in, previous streams and like I've discussed many times with, workout routines, is that you have to have a proper balance in your workouts with the 3 components of that being, of course, your workouts, as well as your nutrition and your recovery. And the recovery is what you do as far as, this could be active recovery, this could be, your sleep, anything like that is going to be sort of how we, classify the definition of recovery here. So training volume only builds muscle if recovery keeps up. So like with anything I've discussed, it's a delicate balance between all of these components in order to reach a goal. You have to balance each one of these if you want to reach your goal effectively. So again, more sets is going to add more stress, but the adaptation only happens when your body can repair and grow stronger. Your body has to have what it needs in order to repair. You can stress your body out as much as possible. Like you can place, a ton of stress on your body through weightlifting. And you could be doing, a lot of really, good workouts, but it's not going to make a difference if you don't have your nutrition and recovery in that balance. It's not going, you're not going to get your results if you don't know and if you don't have the tools you need to balance that out. So stimulus training here. So enough sets, of course, to challenge muscle and trigger growth is what you want to focus on. And then again, rest and recovery, or your recovery itself. This is rest nutrition. This means, having a good sleep schedule. This means getting adequate protein based on your body weight. This means staying hydrated, depending on, who you are as a person, as well as, your specific climate that you're in, male or female, because with men, you got to have a little bit more water than with women. So there's different things you have to keep in mind with hydration. And that's something I may, go back over in the future. But hydration is another aspect that does play a role in your recovery process from your workouts, as well as your stress to rebuild. So when we have a large amount of stress as well, this is what, like I've discussed before, this is what increases our cortisol levels, and this is what can also have a, detrimental impact on what we are trying to accomplish with our workout. So it's going to affect, that process that we're trying to accomplish. So persistent fatigue and soreness is something you need to be aware of. You want to make sure that, in plateaued lifts that you keep, really pushing yourself despite, those efforts. That's where you're going to notice that you're going to sort of struggle. And when you have setbacks, you've got to really, continue to push through. Be aware of poor sleep and irritability, and again, this is going to increase, injury risk when you don't have these different components together. It's not just the fact of helping to aid in, muscle gain and recovery in itself. It's also the fact of preventing injury in your workouts because if you're not fully there and, especially with your mindset and just really going through a lot of stress and you're not fully aware of what you're doing, that can also lead to injury. So again, it's a balance of those components in order to accomplish your goal. And again, I know we're talking about volume here today, but this does play a role because you've got to make sure that you have a balance in order for that volume that you're putting in your workouts to be effective. So, overtraining versus optimal training. So, I've discussed a little bit about overtraining in the past, and basically what that means is that we're training too much. That's kind of getting into the topic of where we're talking about sort of this junk volume, which we'll talk about further. But overtraining is basically doing too much where your body just can't fully recover from your workouts. And it's basically, breaking down muscle. And then, of course, when we're talking about optimal training, we're talking about the, proper amount of training we need that is going to keep us, in line towards our goal. So understanding the difference between these two is important. So optimal training, of course, is the sweet spot. It's where we need to focus our training and stay in that particular, area. This means balancing mechanical tension and recovery. And again, we're talking about mechanical tension that's related to, performing our workouts, giving our body that tension when we, work out, when we do weightlifting, we're placing, tension and stress on our body intentionally in order to build back muscle. And then the recovery is where, the muscle, building that muscle back it comes in. So you got to have a balance between putting the proper stress on your body while at the same time having the proper amount of recovery. You want to deliver enough stimulus for adaptation. So your body, is continuously adapting to the new stimulus that you're placing on it. So you want to have volume that's challenging but sustainable. So like I've discussed in the past, progressive overload. You don't want to go, too crazy. Gradual progress is really what you need to focus on when it comes to optimal training. So, stay within that, proper, you know, set range, rep range where you need to be. And like what we're talking about with hypertrophy, usually Sometimes it can be 4 reps. I mean, excuse me, 4 sets. But a lot of times, 3 to 2 sets is kind of that good spot, especially for beginners. And then when you're talking about hypertrophy in itself, as far as a rep range that you want to stay in, usually that's around 8 to 12 reps. And so the weight that you're lifting, that in itself is something that you kind of have to identify yourself. That's something that you have to be aware of and that you have to track yourself to know, can I adequately lift this weight? Can I go through the full range of motion? Can I, go through the reps in a controlled manner? And that's something you kind of have to identify yourself. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about optimal training. When we're talking about overtraining, of course, this is too much volume. So this is, of course, exceeding that recovery capacity while at the same time is leading to fatigue, plateau, or regression. So when you place too much volume, and when you place too much excessive stress on your body, it's going to, be sort of detrimental to your progress. So you got to make sure you have that balance that you need. This is also going to lead to, of course, an elevated injury risk as well as burnout. Burnout's another thing. I've went through burnout, especially in my workouts before. Whenever I got into, before I, started studying to become a personal trainer, I was like going way like above and beyond with my workouts because I felt like I used to think that you had to go all out, like you had to do complete, like full body, like go go crazy, no rest days. And that's not how it works. You've got to have a balance with a lot of these different aspects because if you don't, that's how you get to injury. You're not giving your body enough, recovery, time. You're not giving it the nutrients it needs. It's going to inevitably lead to injury. And two, you're going to get, fatigue, as far as, when you're doing so much of those at workouts over time and you're just not having a proper structure, it does burn you out. So you have to make sure, again, it's a balance. In order to get there, you have to have a balance. And that's something, of course, I've learned, being a trainer and sort of optimizing my routine to work properly. It's something that is a process to learn to where what's the right sort of range that I need to be in. And you can learn that. It takes a little bit of time to get into a rhythm and a routine that works for you, but it is possible. So growth, of course, can stall despite the more work you're putting in. So you may be putting in a lot of work in your workouts and your exercises, but you still have to have that recovery and that nutrition aspect for it to make a difference. You've got to have those things because you can work out really hard, but it's not going to add to progress if you're not getting the proper nutrients your body needs and if you're not, getting the proper sleep. And this is something too that before I do continue on here, something too that I always, when I do a call with, any potential clients or anybody that's interested in coaching, and usually I'll always ask the question, you know, of their habits, what did they eat in a day? If they have any, do they drink or smoke? Any kind of things like that, I usually ask. And the reason why I'll ask that is because your habits can make an impact on whether you progress, especially like when we're talking about, nutrition. Proper nutrition makes a difference. And sometimes too, like, talking about as far as the aspect of like alcohol and things like that, that can have an effect on your progress as well. So you have to identify a lot of different factors. So a lot of people think that trying to accomplish, a goal related to fitness is a lot of the workout itself, but it's a little bit more than that. Like there's a lot of different, variables that you have to be aware of that you have to balance in order for it to work out properly. So continuing on here, the nervous system's role in recovery. So heavy training stresses not just muscles, but the central nervous system. So what this does and why this is, I'm sure you're wondering why we're talking about this, is that this can lead to a slower reaction time and reduce coordination in stalled lifts. So if you're placing too much excessive volume on your body, this is affecting your nervous system in itself too, and this is going to reduce how effective you are in your workouts. So again, prioritize sleep. I would recommend tracking your sleep if you have a smartwatch or anything like that. I think that gives you a good idea on, where your recovery side of things are. I think that's a great thing to do. I track my sleep every day. I've been tracking it for a while because it helps me to identify, how where my recovery is. It just gives me a clear picture on, the different stages of sleep I go through and the quality of my sleep as well. So deep sleep, if you're not aware, is if you do track your sleep, you'll notice, the different stages. Like I use an Apple Watch, and you can do this with Fitbit too. There's different, you know, smartwatches that you can use that do the same thing. But basically, when you're tracking your sleep, it'll show different stages that you go through. And of course, you have your normal, core sleep phase. Um, and then you'll have your REM sleep phase, which is your rapid eye movement. And that's usually the time where you're sort of dreaming. And then you have your deep sleep phase, which is, of course, where it's not where all the recovery, of course, is placed, but you get the most recovery, like your body is recovering the most when it goes through the deep sleep phase. And it helps to track your sleep. Of course, you can't have full control over the stages you go in your sleep, but when you see sort of those rhythm, sort of patterns that you go through, like with my deep sleep, sometimes you usually don't get much of like deep sleep. Usually it's roughly, for me, it's roughly 20 to 30 minutes that I'll kind of stay in that phase in a night. So it's not something that you get a whole lot, but if you do get a lot of deep sleep, you'll kind of notice that you're more, rested. And that's what that sort of phase is it's really, you're getting a lot of, rest and recovery in your muscles from that phase. So I just want to mention that I do recommend, tracking your sleep if you can. Use deload weeks to reduce systematic stress. Deload weeks is something I've discussed in the past, but if you're not aware of what that means, that is basically sort of a period where you're still working out, you're still doing your normal routine, but you're sort of taking time to slow down. So you're not doing like your normal progressive overload. So like with progressive overload, I always talk about, gradually progressing your weight, your intensity. But what we do in a deload is this is like a short phase where you'll basically sort of slow down in your workout routine. You'll just do, maintaining, your physique is kind of what I would like to describe. It's more of like a maintaining sort of phase where you give your body a little bit of rest while you're still putting a little bit, you're still putting a little bit of stress on your body, but you're sort of slowing down. This is just giving yourself a little bit of time to, let your body have a little bit of rest while you're still exercising. You're just kind of lowering your intensity. And that's what that means when you have those, systematic deload weeks or, having that recovery in there. Also manage lifestyle stress, which is your work, your life, nutrition, try to, there's different things I know that we can't fully control, but, the things that you can control, take control of those, different aspects of your life that can make a difference accomplishing, your specific outcome that you're trying to reach. So deload weeks and strategic pullbacks. So again, I do want to expand upon this aspect of deload. And again, this is a planned reduction in training volume or intensity. So this can last 5 to 7 days built into your program. Sometimes I do this with my clients and I'll have them do a phase of it to slow down. However, you can do it in different ways. So this keeps you consistent without overreaching. So this is just a phase where, again, you're just slowing down. You're still putting, a little bit of stress on your body. You're still working out, but you're giving yourself time to, sort of recuperate and then go back into your normal training and progression. So this matters again to prevent overtraining and burnout. It gives you time to just, kind of slow down. It allows muscles and tendons in the nervous system to fully recover, and it also helps to break through those plateaus, giving your body space to adapt. So it's just a, a strategic phase that you can add into your workout routine. And sometimes I do it myself where I'll have times where I sort of slow down a bit in order to, you know, because like when you're constantly going, trying to, progress, it can get sort of, overwhelming, and it can get to where like, okay, I got to slow down so I don't, sort of go too far and become really, you know, burnt out with what I'm doing. So I do that myself sometimes where I'll sort of slow down, give myself, lower the weight a little bit and then pick back up to where I was before. And that's what we're talking about, is that this can have a lot of good benefits, when you take time to sort of take a step back and then pick back up. So longevity over ego. So make sure that as you're, you're performing volume, when you have, the proper amount of volume, that you don't try to lift, too heavy. Don't try to ego lift. And that's what I want to go over in this point here is the ego trap. So as much as possible, avoid chasing heavy weights to prove strength. So make sure that you're not trying to constantly ignore form and recovery. Don't focus on the short-term wins, or excuse me, focus on the short-term wins, but don't, think about all of the, progress you've made, but don't let the minor setbacks sort of get in the way. So longevity is really about, of course, prioritizing technique over the weight you're lifting, as well as your progress with small and sustainable increases. Make sure that you respect recovery as a part of growth, train for years of strength, not just weeks of PR. So the takeaway here is that muscles grow when you train with patience and purpose. So don't let ego cut short the gains, consistency that you can deliver over a lifetime. So the main point I'm trying to get across here is that it's more about, again, your technique over, how heavy you're lifting. Focus more on how you're controlling that weight versus just trying to, lift the heaviest weight possible. So quality over quantity, of course, the problem with more, you need to make sure, that you're aware that more is not always the best. So extra sets can often drift into junk volume. Again, junk volume is basically where we're just trying to increase our numbers just cuts. We're not, with our sets and reps, we're not being strategic with how we progress. So this is what leads to fatigue rising, but muscle stimulus isn't, you're not getting the proper muscle stimulus your body needs. So this is going to lead to risk of injury and is going to also lead to slower recovery. So the quality focus is to make sure that you prioritize intensity and effort per set, focus on perfect form and mind muscle connection, and stop a set when stimulus drops, not when ego pushes. So growth thrives the most on effective, intentional sets, not endless reps that drain injury with little return, energy with little return, I should say. So make sure that with your workouts, it's more about the quality of what you're doing, the quality of your workouts, being intentional with how you go about your workouts. This is something that I go over with my clients pretty often, where I always mention, you know, when they go into their workouts, think about what you're doing. Think about, be intentional when you go into the gym, because there's times that with me, I do it sometimes. Try to be aware of when I do it. But there's times where we'll just go into the gym and we just kind of go on autopilot and we're not really thinking about, progressing, or we're not really, we know we have to do our exercise, but we're not really intentionally thinking about what we need to do. What can I do today to progress? And that's something that I try to get across to my clients as often as possible, because it's going to help you progress so much more when you're you're intentional with why you're going in there. Why, what do I need to do today? Do I need to increase this? Do I need to, change my intensity? Do I need to try to go up in weight? You need to ask yourself these questions as you're going into your routine in order to progress. You can't just, go about it on autopilot. You need to be intentional when you're going in there. And that's what I try to, always get across to my clients. And I know sometimes it can be hard. I do it myself where I just go in there and I have those days where I'm not, really thinking with intention of what I need to do as far as progression. But you kind of have to shift your mindset. You have to think about why you're in there and what you're wanting to accomplish. And that's, a big thing I always try to mention. Alrighty, guys. So I know that's a ton of stuff here, and I apologize. This information's not been updated, but sometimes I do get in a rush when I'm trying to do, juggle different things. But you know what I'm talking about. And you pretty much know my website and everything, so I don't think it's a big deal. But I do want to thank you guys for taking the time to check this live stream out. I really hope that you found it helpful and valuable. And I really enjoy talking about these points. If you guys have any questions, of course, you can, leave a comment and a message. I do have an email, of course. It's not here on screen because I didn't put it here, but it's brandonparton95 at gmail.com. Again, my website is bponlinefitness.com. You can check that out as well if you want any more information on online fitness coaching. Again, guys, I really do appreciate your time. I really hope that you found this helpful and valuable, and that it gave you some insight on the topic of volume. But feel free to let me know if you have any questions on anything. I will have another live stream next Wednesday at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time, and I will also have a X Spaces discussion tomorrow on Thursday, of course, every Thursday at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time as well, where I'm going to be doing sort of a podcast like discussion there. So check that out if you're interested. But I really appreciate it, guys. I hope you have a great day. And I will see you guys in the next live stream next Wednesday at 12. So thank you, guys.